Sunny Durham, North Carolina. It is a great day and definitely some great weather. It's in the middle of April, so of course people are enjoying the weather. I've seen folks getting out and about and all in that space. And of course, not living that far from the Duke campus, it is always great having amazing folks that are in the area and doing amazing things. As a matter of fact, this past weekend, I was working at the Hayti Heritage Center and they had a couple of things going on, including a poetry slam that had a different novel approach. My good friend Jason Ahanu, who runs that poetry slam, came up with the idea of actually having the poets do lyrics. So there were some poems that were done using rap lyrics and the lyrics of Prince, and I think there was even some Michael Jackson, and you had to do it as that slam poetry kind of competition, but you had to recite the lyric of a song, and then he would play the song afterwards, and then folks would be trying to guess the song, and of course doing the whole slam schedule and doing the whole way of judging with the audience judging and all in that space. So they were in one of those specialty slams because they've already picked their team for this year and have gonna be ready to go to Southern Fried, which I believe this year will be in Knoxville, Tennessee, if I'm remembering correctly. And then of course on Sunday there is a church service that meets at the Hayti Heritage Center because that is a converted church and all in that space. So it is a converted church that is now being used as a African American cultural arts center. So we do a lot of great things at that place, and there is a church that meets actually in one of the classrooms, as they are a smaller storefront kind of church. Eventually they may go into our performance space, which is the old sanctuary, as they grow in size. I know when Christ Central was there, they actually did 2 services and had hundreds of folks that would be coming there on a regular basis, but then they moved to a different facility. So now it is a smaller church. Actually, it's 2 churches that meet there, one that meets every other week and the other one that meets on the weekly basis. So that was going on. And then I had to give a tour, giving some of the history of the Black Wall Street and Durham and some of that was going on in that space. But you know, one of the things that was going on in that same space is there was a gentleman that used to come by all the time because he was associated with the late night space, that being Biff Henderson. He would pop in every once in a while because he was associated with David Letterman being the man on the street and all along those lines. So I definitely remember watching some late night television, definitely having that connection to Biff Henderson, as he is part of a prominent family here in this community and all in that way. This community being, like I said, Durham, North Carolina, which is home of the Duke Blue Devils and of course home of North Carolina Central University as well. But as I was going through some folks that would be of interest to talk to and all along those lines, I had the pleasure of reaching out to somebody that was in that late night space. And I'm definitely looking forward to having a conversation with him. And then I've got a life coach that'll be coming on this show as well. But I want to bring in the amazing Kreskin, because I remember watching as a young man shows like Carson and a number of others, and you would oftentimes hear of what the amazing Kreskin was doing. And sometimes you'd be watching those shows and going like, hey, he's just truly amazing. How does he do all this? How does he get these folks to have this amazing fun and all in that space? So when I saw that he was available through podcast guests, I reached out because I was like, I have got to talk to this man, and his assistants were definitely able to make that happen. Because I, like I said in the letter to them, I have been a fan of mentalists and illusionists. I've definitely remembered watching some of the greats like Copperfield in the field of magic and others and all along that way. So I'm definitely wanting to hear some of the amazing stories that the amazing Kreskin will be sharing with me on this particular day. So glad that we got the amazing Kreskin with us and all along those lines. How are you doing, Mr. Kreskin? Like I said, it's such a pleasure to have you on the Pod TV network, which was founded by my friends Nick Palveda and Kim Calhoun. They were frustrated by some of what they saw on regular media and wanted to have conversations around financial literacy and other things. And when they went to mainstream media, they were, given either astronomical figures that they had to pay, or they were told that it might be put on at like 2 or 3 in the morning. So instead they went and formed this live stream network, and that kind of resonated with something with me, because my folks had done something similar in the 70s in the world of radio, because they had been frustrated by some of the music that they weren't hearing in that space. So I'm just glad that I was able to bring the amazing Kreskin here to Pod TV, and that you can share some of these amazing stories in your life. So, like I said, I do remember watching the routines. I know that sometimes Carson himself would try to be playing the role of you, but then you would come out and be your truly amazing self as yourself when he wasn't imitating you and all in that space. But what was it like working in those heydays of that Hollywood experience?
Well, by the way, Mark, did I hear that you also did something in the past in radio? Did you mention radio again?
I did mention radio. My parents started a radio station when I was a teenager. They were not in the field of radio. Dad was a engineer by trade and had served in the military. Mom was a guidance counselor, but they are fans of jazz, fans of blues, and they were frustrated that they weren't seeing enough of that, and they also weren't hearing enough issues being pertaining to either the minority community or the rural community. And so they said, with some friends, let's form a radio station. So
and they
with no experience.
How long did the radio station go with them? How long did they run it?
It started around 1976 or something like that, and it lasted till I graduated in about 84, about 86, 87. So it was on for about 10 or 11 years.
You have a wonderful background. In fact, I couldn't avoid not asking you, how in the world did you get the title of your show, Online Dinner Party? Now, that's a neat. What made you capture that?
Well, when I came up with that, and that's one of the show's names and everything, is I was thinking to myself, if you were having a house party and you wanted to invite friends in, and it would be like a dinner party at a house or a mansion or whatever, you would probably be inviting different guests in. They would be coming from different environments. They would be coming from different things, but y'all would maybe be eating the food, playing cards, maybe having some drinks and everything. But then conversation would just go all over the place. And hence the online dinner party, because I was like, we can do the same thing minus the food, but having a dinner party like
it's ironic because in recent months, more and more people, less and less people are going to theaters. Right. Just as unfortunately, there's been a breakdown in our culture that's started with the pandemic and what have you. And so many of my performances, aside from the theaters around the world, are in private homes. Mm-hmm. When I say private homes, there could be as many as 60, 70 people that they somehow, how they ever fit them in some of these rooms, I'll never know. But it's so refreshing to have people close that I can see very quickly and immediately in front of me, because my audiences have varied everywhere from, private affairs for corporate people to 8,000 people outdoors or in stadiums and what have you. So my work has been extraordinary. As a matter of fact, the airline industry figured out 2 years ago that I've flown. Now I'm 88 years old, and that I have flown in my career, in my entire career, a little over 3.5 million miles, more than almost any pilot in the United States today. But you almost can't pick a part of the world I haven't been in, and some of them have been in. I'm not going to interrupt you because you've got some question you want to ask me, but some of them have been fascinating because, like in Japan, it turns out that the host of the program that I was a guest on, and it was a live show, did not speak. The audience there did not speak English, and the question, of course, arose. They trusted me to handle it. How was I going to work and produce my work with people who didn't speak their language? The host fortunately spoke English as well, and I was able to tune in on the thoughts of various people, and it became a very exciting experience. My life I have to tell you, Mark, my life has been an adventure. It really has.
Sounds like it's been an adventure. And I wanted to know, when did you first realize that you had this ability to be a mentalist, and what exactly in your mind is a mentalist? Because some people will be like, it's just a matter of getting into the mind of the person and kind of the trickery and illusion that goes on with magic, and other folks are like, it is a very astute field, and it is one that only a select few understand, even though there are many that will claim that they have the abilities, but I don't know that they all have the abilities
Well,
that they claim to have.
well, I have. I think that's what's fascinating to people. I knew what I wanted to do when I was 5.5 years old. I didn't have a model. I didn't see any person perform, but a comic strip. A
Mhm.
comic strip triggered my imagination. Now, of course, I couldn't read then, but my mother was wise enough to read books to me, to read comic books to me, and what have you. And there was a legendary comic that was very, very popular 50, 60, 70 years ago. His name was Mandrake, and it was called Mandrake the Magician. Now, he dressed in white tie and tails, had a wonderful black assistant by the name of Lothar, and it was a team, and they fought crime. He really wasn't a magician. He had hypnotic abilities, he had telepathic abilities, and he fought crime. So when we went out to play, I didn't play Superman or so forth. I played Mandrake. I was the character, and my friends, some of who played, police, and others who played the criminals and the people who are stealing and what have you. I would solve the crimes by my apparent hypnotic abilities. But by the time I got into my late before my teens, I knew what I wanted to do because I wanted to be like this character, Mandrake. And early in my early teens, I was starting to perform magic, but that wasn't really my great interest. It was the ability to kind of tune in and sense what other people were doing or thinking. And it became a part of my lifestyle. My family, by the way, I changed my name before I even reached by age 20. My original name was Kresge, Kresge, the same as the department stores.
Mhm.
But since I was already performing when I was 10, 12, 14, and in my high school, I had one teacher in Miss Galloway in fourth grade who became also my teacher in sixth grade.
Mhm.
And she, because she was a teacher and moved to the higher grade and what have you. But by then I was already performing. I was performing for audiences. And by the time I moved from junior high to high school and went into ninth grade, I already did that day, that night, a full evening concert of a little over 2 hours and 20 minutes for an entire theater audience of the entire school. And that was my performing. So I was already performing at that time. But I was early already, even before then, in grade school, my teacher, Miss Galloway, what a gift. When I tell you a story about a teacher, then you want to hear how inspirational a person can be to someone's life. By the time I was in sixth grade, Miss Galloway was setting aside on Friday or whatever day it was, 40 minutes or half an hour for me to perform with my classmates because she saw that I was already performing in private affairs. I was performing in churches and what have you. And I remember in one of my classes, I said, I'm going to try to figure out what movie you're thinking of, all of you here in the class. And it was a class of about 30 people. And I said, concentrate and so forth. And I pointed out to Gloria Palmer, whose friend was Judy Dunn sitting next to her, but I can remember this so vividly, even though I said, Gloria, you're thinking of a movie? And she said, yes. I said, this is strange because the movie you're thinking of is not one that you saw last week or when we go to the movies on weekends or something. You're going back to last Christmas. And she sat back and said, that's right. I'm thinking of a movie that was a favorite of mine that I saw around Christmas with my mother and father. And I finally named the movie. And Miss Galloway got very impressed with this and had me spend almost an hour each Friday with my classmates because she was interested in how I was tuning in on the thoughts of my audience because I became very sensitive to people around me. I would do this with private affairs, with private parties, and in part of my show, this became a major part of the show. Now I got to tell you something. It's very hard to believe that Miss Galloway, I'll never forget. I did not even know about this until after the last time I saw her, because when I finished college, and already I was performing everywhere, I was traveling. In fact, one of my classes, when I was studying, and my degree was in psychology, but one of my classes, I only had in that one season 2 classes. I only had 2 classes because I was so busy traveling that they felt it was fine to give me my degree because the class was in general psychology. And I look back upon it because in the first 6 weeks of my general psychology course, I wasn't teaching it. The teacher decided after the first few days that I would teach the class and teach about my work and my experiences. And could imagine for that many weeks, I was teaching a class. It was almost unheard of in my life. But I found out something more. After I graduated from college and my degree, I already had an office as a clinical psychologist because I would work with people who had problems and what have you, but I was more performing. And I had to give up my private work because the demand for my work was becoming stronger and stronger. And I found that Miss Galloway, my 4th and 6th grade teacher, quietly, unbeknownst to me through all my years in school, would send a letter to each of the key people I had as teachers in 9th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade, and in college and what have you. And the letter she sent, a personal letter she sent to each of them was, "We don't understand what he does, but you must support him because it's a very special gift." Can you imagine a teacher sending that? And my teachers were very inspiring to me. They showed great interest, never knowing that they had gotten a letter, a single letter from my 4th and 6th grade teacher saying, "Strengthen this in him. It's a very important gift he has."
And along those same lines, Amazing Kreskin, do you think that there is enough support of people's gifts? Because that is something that I don't have any kids of my own, and I'm in my early 60s, will hit 61 in July, but I do have my 2 nephews that are teenagers now. Yeah, because they're both 13 and 14 as of this coming August. Well, actually, they'll be 14 and 15 as of this coming August and everything. So they're 13 and 14 right now. And I know that they get a lot of support, but I know a lot of our kids don't get support of their natural gifts. I was just wondering your thoughts.
I had support from my family. By the way, my name is Kresge. My family name and original name was Kresge, Kresge, the same as department stores, which were all over the place when I was a kid. They were in Newark and different parts of New Jersey. Where are you calling me from? What city are you in?
Durham, North Carolina.
North Carolina. That's a great state. I performed there quite a bit. But at any rate, so I love my work. And the truth of the matter is that all these people, I changed my name to Kreskin. I kept the Kres, dropped the GE, and created a totally new name that never existed by adding a K, I, and N and called Kreskin. And do you know, I have to tell you this because in high school and from then on, all my family, my mother, my father, all my relatives, all my friends called me Kreskin because the name was biggest. I didn't ask them to do that. They decided. I said, I can't. They said, yes, your mom and dad called you Kreskin. My brother called me Kreskin, but it became so much a part of my life because my work was the inspiration of my life. And by the way, one of the keys that we are losing in our modern culture today is the ability to have an empathy and a feeling for others, because as you well know this, and I'm sure at times you may have discussed this, we're not listening to each other as much as well as we once did. There's an instrument called a cell phone.
Yes.
Today, if you're with a group of teenagers and what have you, and you bring up a question and what have you, they'll ask the cell phone and get a 1 word or 3 word answers and put the phone down and forget about it. Years ago, we'd get interested in the topic, look it up in a book, read about it, and research it more and more, and then discuss it more and more. But we're not hearing what each other say anymore. We don't reflect upon the remarks being made in our community, and we do not hear. We don't really hear what people say. Parents, you have to do yourself a favor and take the cell phone, as by the way, in China and such so forth, in certain areas of the world, the cell phone was only allowed in a kid's hands for maybe an hour and 10 minutes or 2 hours in one day. But many people in our culture today have a cell phone in their hands for 8 hours. Perfect example was I was sitting about 8 months ago in a restaurant, and I was with a group of producers, television and radio producers, and I'm talking to them about what's happening in our society. They say, Kreskin, you speak so much before social groups, so discussing what's going on. And I talked about communications, and we don't hear each other or listen because of the cell phone. They said, Kreskin, it's a shame we don't have a camera right now. Turn and look over there. And in this large restaurant, there were 6 to 8 teenagers and college student age people. They weren't even conversing. They were talking to their cell phones. Mm-hmm. So the time, this is a very serious time, and we must communicate with our family, our friends, and what have you.
No, we definitely got to do a better job of communicating, and all along those lines, I couldn't agree with you more on that and everything. I was wondering, because you were there in the early days of television, how much has the television played a role in the way that we are not communicating as well? Because I know a lot of people used to be very glued to their TV sets.
We're not paying attention because we're listening to what's being said, and our thoughts are tied up in what they're saying, and there's no feedback back and forth. And some people have our television on for many hours and are not conversing with the person with them. You're better off when you go to see a movie or you're watching a TV show to talk to someone about what was said, and not when the show is on, but later on. Like you may say certain things, and people will say, "Do you know what Marc said? He said this. What do you think about that?" And by the way, no, you don't get upset. You don't get angry. Today, people are afraid. One thing that's disappeared from our culture is our humor. Humor is rapidly disappearing from our culture. Today, some of the great comedians and some of the established comedians will never work in a university again. They've ended it for the rest of their career. And the reason is this: very simple. This is a very hard thing for me to even tell you or talk about this. Many universities right now have a rule that if you're a professional comedian and you're appearing in university, you must send the entire script of your appearance to them in case they wish to edit it or what have you. And you cannot add or decrease from it. As a result, comedians say, Kreskin, we will never work again because part of the foundation of our work is ad-libbing and saying things off the cuff and what have you. Isn't that sad that that's happened in our culture?
No, that's very sad that that's happening. How much do you think it is easy for somebody that is doing your work to have it resonate with the young people? Because some people will try to figure out the secret of what's going on. They'll be like, you can't really be reading the minds of these folks.
They're interesting. The reason young people have been fascinating audiences to me, and if you want to realize how often young people, you can look at my television series on YouTube, because my series, the half-hour series, went on for 5.5 years. So a lot of my shows are in colleges and in schools and what have you. Hundreds of them are, although I have all ages now around the world, because they're interested in their imagination is stimulated. They haven't seen anything quite like this. I don't use the term psychic because I don't claim any psychic powers. I believe that everything I've done is done by perfectly natural and scientific means, except that I don't understand everything I do. I can't explain what I do, because some of the things that happen in my performances are clearly, I'm tuning in on the thoughts of individuals. There's a harmony between us. And that's one of the keys in my performances, whether it's 2,000 people or whether it's hundreds of people in a university audience or what have you. That is really one of the keys, to get them harmonized with my thinking so that they're almost tuned into the way I'm thinking. I can influence people's thinkings and cause them to think of what I'm thinking. And that becomes one of the highlights of my performances. So my work is almost a harmony. And that's why people who come to my program, they're not coming to see something. They're not coming to watch something. They're literally, the ones that have seen me before are coming to be a part of the program because they're intrigued if somehow during the show I bring up something that they're thinking of, something that they're, and by the way, that's what happened as the years went by and I became a teenager. And now the thought reading became a very, very important part of what I was doing on stage. Now I've done things, and here I am, 88 years old and still working energetically as much as ever because I have a great passion for what I do. And I, at the same time, have to tell you that some of the things that happened in my program, some of the things that happened in my life, I can't quite explain. For example, one of the most dramatic incidents, and I've written 21 books now, and one of the most dramatic incidents that I've written about in one of my books was when I overslept and woke up late. And this was in my late teens. And I don't oversleep. I don't have that problem. Well, I jumped out of bed, got dressed and what have you. I had to drive to Newark Airport, which is where my flight was taking place. I did not have a road manager then, which I do all the time now when I travel. I have someone with me who can make sure the stage is set, the sound is what have you. But I was going by myself and I drove to Newark Airport. The airport was different in those days. You didn't go through great security. I drove and parked in a parking lot and rushed to the counter where I was going to get my tickets and what have you. And I arrived there. They knew me because I'd flown out of the Newark Airport dozens or hundreds of times, who knows. And they gave me my tickets. And I hadn't had a shake. I had my suitcases. I gave them my suitcases, and bear this in mind, gave them my suitcases, kept my attaché case, which is a material I may need on stage, a deck of cards, a few other things. And I rushed and ran to the gate, which was outdoors, and ran in time to turn and see my plane backing out and taking off.
Wow.
When I rushed back to the airport, I was very stressed out. I never had this happen before. They said to me, Kreskin, and that's what they called me. They said, Kreskin, we knew you were late, but we thought you'd perhaps be able to make the flight. We can get you a flight to another city in New York State, where you'll get a connecting flight to the city in which you're working in, and we'll your luggage has gone on. We can't do anything about that. So they got me tickets, 2 sets of tickets. I went to the gate, and the plane had not taken off yet. It was going to be for a while anyway. I got on the plane, boarded, and went on my way. And then I got a connecting flight and went to the city in which I was performing in. It was a nightclub. It was a nightclub that was filled. It was sold out. And I'm now backstage. And I'm preparing to go on stage. And I'll never forget this. As I go to reach the door to go to walk to the stage, my dressing room my door opens. And I stop and I look, and who walk in but 2 police? And they say, aren't you Kreskin? And I said, yes, I am. They had luggage and pieces of luggage in their hands. They said, well, we found out they were from another city, maybe 45 minutes or an hour away, that they went to this trouble. They said, we found out where you were working because we saw your name on the luggage pieces here, the Kreskin name. We called your office and they explained where you were. And we said, we'll try to get the luggage to them. Here is the luggage. You probably would never have gotten this luggage. So what do you mean? They said, Kreskin, the plane you mistaken crashed in a cow pasture in New York State.
Wow.
And the chances are you would not have survived.
Wow.
When I look upon this, Mark, back upon this, I don't miss flights. I just never have missed a flight. But for me to oversleep and then to get to the airport and get there late, and then to turn out to miss a flight that could have been the end of my career. I wonder about things like this because I don't know the answers to them.
No, and a lot of times we don't know the answers. But one of the things that I know mentalists have to do, and magicians, and a lot of other folks have to do, is they have to be very observant. And one of the things I observed myself was during this whole pandemic period that we've been in for the last 3 years, a lot of people started being reflective and started being reflective on their careers, reflective on their life. And some people started getting into new jobs, new entrepreneurial businesses, but also paying attention to Mother Earth around us and all in that space. So I was wondering, do you think that I might be onto something that we as a people and as a humanity are starting to pay more attention to those things that are around us because we were almost forced to? Because I know a lot of people are into this mindfulness space, and they're also into this notion of trying to have a better understanding of Mother Nature. But I know there was a time we were in that rush kind of attitude, and I'm not saying we're not, but it does seem like it's going in a different direction.
Mark, that's a very inspiring thing that you've shared, which most people are not doing right now. They're not doing. I'm preparing a seminar, which will be added 10 minutes after my regular 2 hour, hour and a half, whatever my show is going to be. It's going to be a 20-minute seminar in which I'm going to show how I can perhaps train people mentally to become more intuitive. But you're doing something most important. You're communicating. Obviously, you're talking to people more and more. You're active. You're interested in what other people have to say, not just interviewing like this, but in your lifestyle. And you're doing something which, when the pandemic hit, Mark, and it as you know, and you've I'm sure heard this or discussed this, it hit hardest young people, because young people are not getting the same breath out of grade school or junior high school or high school as they did before, because, and it was one of the biggest mistakes ever made in the history of this country, that the United States shut down their colleges and their school systems for 2 years. That was a terrible mistake, because kids were not communicating as well. They saw their friends next door to them, but they weren't going into a place where they had to listen to a teacher, learn things and study things. And that's affected some students today who are not doing as well as in school as they should be doing, Mark. And you've heard this, I'm sure.
No, I've definitely heard that they're not doing as well, and they're still trying to adjust. And definitely, it does seem like we're in more of that hybrid world. You just mentioned that even some of your shows were in that virtual space, in addition to being in the live space. So I know that even when you were doing those television kind of shows that were there in Burbank and other places, that live audience had to be part of what was feeding the energy and everything. So how has it been bringing that energy to a virtual space?
My energy was such, and the reason I did some of the shows, the fellow that Karnak, Johnny Carson, I did 88 shows with him, and on through the years go. But the reason they kept having me back is because they felt that many in the audience found seeing what I was doing, tuning in on people's thoughts, fascinating, and wondering if maybe something that happened in their life. Because most of your folks listening in right now, if you think about it, folks, you've had incidents happen. I don't mean every day in your life, because this became a lifestyle with me that I train and condition my mind. But you've had incidents where you can't quite explain them. How you suddenly, someone was coming to surprise you with something, and you sensed ahead of time what it was or what was taking place and what have you, or that someone was troubled in some way because you were so tuned to certain people that you were picking up information that you couldn't really explain and couldn't really understand how it took place. I have a feature in my performances, Mark, that no one in the world is doing. No one does this. And for me to end my career now, but because no one is parts of my work, no one is doing what I do. And if I didn't know, if I stopped my career, no one would see this anymore. And the thing is, one of the great features of my program is my check test. And my check test has been written about in magazine articles. It's been satirized. If you I gotta mention this to you because you're going to get a kick out of this. I only found this out a few weeks ago, but the gentleman has a TV series on and his name is Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen King is one of the great comedy writers and comedy. He's written some extraordinary books, but he's written horror stories, and he's written some very successful horror stories. And the one that's out now, it's called The Institute. And the reason people were calling me all over the place about it, and he's not I don't mean he's not a comedian, but he's a writer and has written successful novels. But it's a horror story, and the reviews have been incredible because they say it's probably the best horror story he's ever written. It's 500 and some pages long, and you'll be curious and interested in one of the characters in the book because he carries a character in the book called Little Kreskin. So I want now. By the way, what happens to Little Kreskin is not my lifestyle. Don't anyone get scared that they're going to be frightened by me. But isn't that neat that he decided to add a character? As a matter of fact, if you folks, not only am I flattered that he has a character about me about in the book, but there's a movie called The Great Buck Howard.
Mm-hmm.
Great Buck Howard. John Malkovich plays me in the movie, and John Colin Hanks is also in the movie. So it's always been flattering to me that I've been used as comic strip characters, cartoon characters, or what have you, and that this has gone on. But don't be frightened. I don't do crazy things like some of the cartoon characters.
That's good to know that you don't do crazy things and all along those lines. And like I said, you asked about how the dinner party theme came along and all of that. Part of that is that we have amazing other folks that come on and share some of their wisdom. And one of them is a life coach. And I'm sure she's been enjoying some of your conversation as well. So I just wanted to bring in Miss Pitts and all in that way. And I also have somebody else that is in.
You just brought up Laura. Is it Dr. Laura Pitts is her name?
Yes.
Yeah. And is she a physician?
I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and life coach.
Family therapist.
Yes, sir.
Good to meet you. Great to meet you.
Been loving your interview. Oh my goodness, it's been amazing.
Well, my life as a doctor and as a family therapist, and I'm writing down your name because how do I spell your last name? P
is in Paul, I, T is in Tom, T is in Tom, S as in Sam.
What do you think is the
I'm sorry?
FT. FT it is that
LMFT, licensed marriage and family therapist.
Lauren. I love names and the reason I write them down is I meet so many thousands of people around the world and some keep writing to me and your work is interesting because you're dealing with human behavior and I know you could sympathize and understand some of the points I'm making about what's happened with
I've been taking notes, Mr. Kreskin. I've been sitting here taking notes. She's
been taking notes. She's just like going to a lecture and everything. So she's been taking notes based on what you were saying and all. And that's one thing I was curious about is.
But communication, as you know, is so important in our lifestyle. And that's the excitement of my life. I when I come back from trips, well, I started to mention I won't interrupt because it's important that you speak to her. But one of the features of my life has been the check test, and in all my shows. And Dr. Lauren, I like your name. I like the name Dr. Lauren because that kind of a humming name. But and Marc, this has fascinated people for decades all over the world. In all my performances, at the end of the program, if the program runs an hour or an hour and a half, I gather a committee of 4 strangers, people I've never met before, unless it's a return engagement and I know the audience. Well, that you can't make strangers. But say 4 strangers. I hand them my check, my fee for the evening. If the check has been sent ahead of time, I hand them a voucher that says this stands for my check. One of the committee members of the 4 leaves the building with me. We go out of the building with 1 or 2 people from the audience who will verify that out of the building, I cannot see or hear what's going on. My check is then hidden anywhere in the entire theater, audience, staging, what have you. It's hidden within the confines of what I work. If I'm performing outside where there could be thousands of people, they bring a car or a truck. It's parked at the front near the stage, and the windows are all papered black, so no one can't see out of them. And I'm taken in the car. A witness is there with me and two others who verify I cannot see what's going on, because while I'm out of commission, my check is hidden anywhere in the entire theater, or if it's outdoors, anywhere amongst the thousands in an audience. When they've hidden it, they come and get me. They bring me back to the theater. At Carnegie Hall, it was, I don't know how many stories high where the balcony of the theater was. And anyway, and there's my committee on stage. I do not ask them a question. There's no conversation. All they must do, I'll pick one of them, is to concentrate on what I've done, what they've done, and say nothing to me. If I don't find my check hidden inside that theater or the stadium, I forfeit my fee. The fee is returned to the people who booked me, and the show is done for free. And I've done this all over the world, even with audiences that do not speak my language, and prepare people who've hidden it that do not speak my language. If I don't find it, one of the most dramatic incidents took place. This was in a gymnasium, because the theater was too small and it was family weekend. And coming to my show were not only the teachers and the students, but parents. So they said, Kreskin, we have to have it in the gymnasium. So it was a large gymnasium. They built a metal stage for me at the front. Now I've hidden it. And I'm walking to the audience. I will never forget this. I found myself turning towards a man who was sitting in the bleachers, but of the lowest seat. And I looked at him and I said, sir, would you stand? And I said, I've never asked anybody to do this. Would you open your mouth? I looked, I said, I'm sorry, sir. Close your mouth. I apologize. Let me go on from here. And I walked back to the stage. I picked one of the other committee members, and now I'm walking through the audience, walking blindly, and suddenly freeze. And I turn. I'm standing in front of the same man as before. I said, would you stand? If I embarrass you, sit down, and I will end my search at this moment. Would you open your mouth? I say, does this have anything to do with your mouth? To the day I die, I will never forget this. He reached in his mouth, took out his upper plates, and handed me my check.
Oh my goodness.
Which makes me think of the night at another gymnasium. I'm walking through the audience and it was crowded, and I hit a man with my elbow, and I said something. I'm walking. I said something about a gun, and I hit a man with my elbow, and I said, please, I'm sorry. I apologize. And it couldn't be a policeman. He was dressed in a suit, like maybe one of the teachers, what have you. I walked to the stage, and now I say, well, one of you who hid the check, I want you to concentrate on what I've done. Say nothing to me in any way, shape, or form. I walk through the audience. I end up in front of the man who was in a business suit when I said the word gun. And I said, sir, could you come out to the aisle? And it was a crowded gymnasium. I said, can I open your jacket? He said, if you're very careful. I open the jacket. He turns out he's a plainclothesman. And he's wearing a shoulder holster. And I said, can I take the gun out of your holster? He said, if you're very careful. I turned the gun towards my eyes, and the committee had taken tweezers and shredded the check and filed it down the barrel of the gun. So if you heard where my check has been hidden in my career, it's been, when I come back, I return to university sometimes 8 or 10 times, because they're fascinated. They try to stump me each time.
Wow. And they haven't done it yet. That's amazing and everything. What do you think is one of the biggest life lessons that you've learned from all the great work that you've done in television and in the performance that you've done around the world? So what is one of the great life lessons that you've learned and everything?
You know, I'm going to depart in one other area, because I'm going to give you an example. I've worked on 150 crime cases in my career, not in solving a crime, but in working with people, possibly witnesses who have no memory of what took place and what have you. And I've helped to solve some very dramatic cases. And what happened was my brother, who was a law enforcement officer, one day he comes to my house. He said, "Oh, well, wait a minute. They brought a man hit and ran and mowed down a person in West Colville, New Jersey. The police came to me. My brother came to me and says, I have 3 people. My officer's sake, could you work with them? 3 women, they were elderly, came in, and they were obviously very upset. They had seen the accident, and they could not remember the details, or they didn't see the license plate. I worked with the first woman. She was so upset. I said, please, I'm going to have you leave. The second woman, I had to sit down in a chair. I was able to relax her. And by slowly, mentally regressing her to an hour and a half or so before she was there, I said, you're not going to get upset because you're not there anymore. You're looking through a camera and seeing it. And then she saw the car and what have you. She was only to gather maybe 4 or 5 digits of the license plate. We sent her away. I worked with a third person. The other lady, believe it or not, was able to gather the other digits. They got the full license plate. That hit and run guy had escaped to a state outside of here, and they captured the person the next day and brought him. And it was because of their memories that I was able to resurrect the details and help solve the case. The bottom line I learned is that all of us, every one of us, without realizing it, has been exposed to things that expose our life. In the learning, and I've learned it, of course, because of my work, the learning is that we may not realize why, but somehow we've been impacted by people we've met and know, and not even know the full reasons why. That's one of the greatest learning lessons I've ever had. And psychologists who book me for seminars and talking about it point out that if anyone has proved this, you have by the fact that there is more in that unconscious than we know about right now.
Right. No, there's no doubt about that. Dr. Pitts, and definitely I'm hoping that Mr. Kreskin would stay with us for the duration of the show and everything. But how much of this that you're hearing resonates with even your work and everything? Because I'm thinking that a lot of what you do isn't just marriage counseling, but it's also getting people to go on the right direction and to try to figure out their purpose in life. And I think a lot of it, what he's talking about is the fact that we don't observe a lot of what is going on in our life on a regular basis. And a lot of times we don't even think about it and don't really pay attention to what's happening in our space because we're so much in that rip and run kind of attitude. But I was wondering your thoughts around that, because I don't think we do enough paying attention to what's in our surroundings.
Virtually everything that Mr. Kreskin said about, how the human mind works, what a lot of people don't realize, Mark, is that your thoughts and feelings are the remote control that determines the frequency that your brain operates on. So if you could just envision, I don't know if you know someone, for example, who's ever had a stroke and they have the scan and they turn the little notches on the machine to determine whether or not there's brain activity. When it comes to behavior, our emotional in relationship with the situations and circumstances of our lives, our thoughts and feelings govern what we're emitting out into the atmosphere. So if you look at it, for example, through the laws of attraction or the laws of circulation, what you're putting out is what, in essence, you're going to draw to you. We are energy beings. And I know a lot of people get into forces of the universe and what have you, and that's all fine, well, and good. But when you think about us as energetic beings and how we are when you walk into a room, you've heard the expression, the tension's so thick in here, you can cut it with a knife, or you work it, right? Or you walk into a setting where perhaps you don't feel safe and the hair stands up on the back of your neck, or you get goosebumps. That's because we feel the energy that is in the environment that we're in. And that energy think about it this way: where your thoughts go, your energy flows. So if you're expending an exorbitant amount of energy thinking about things that are negative, that are adverse, that are laden with the trauma that you've been through, the adverse childhood experiences, that ACEs term that we keep hearing about in more recent years, then it's going to expend all of your energy, and you are literally exhausting yourself focusing on where you've come from, what you've done, what's happened to you, and it's robbing you of your sense of self. So I tell people, when you're thinking about mental illness, when you're thinking about the challenges of life, people talk about, everybody now is on the anxiety bandwagon, right? Everybody's anxious, everybody's depressed. And I said, did anybody ever tell you that depression in its infancy, mental illness in its most infantile stage, is your persistent focus on negativity? It is, you are expending your mental energy thinking about everything that's wrong in your life, everything that you don't have, everything that you didn't get, everyone that has violated you or in some way left you feeling like the victim. And by default, you're eroding yourself of the ability to be present. So when we talk about mindfulness, all mindfulness is your ability to be deliberate and to be intentional in being present in the moment, in feeling what you're feeling, and trying to have that connectivity that helps you to understand what you're feeling and why you're feeling it. But people get lost. They get lost in the experiences of their life, Mark, that are evoking pain, that are evoking fear. And it becomes this chain link that informs, the fears that evolve from that. And then those fears and those adverse experiences inform the negative feelings that one has about themselves. And then that informs how you express yourself and how you act. And then that informs the negative self-talk. But Mark, all of that is linked together by your interpretation of your experience.
Yeah, and that same kind of feeling, and this is for both you and the amazing Kreskin and everything, is I don't know that we pay enough attention to those deja vu moments. I remember many years ago going to a summer camp. It was actually a summer camp for journalism. So this would have been in the late 70s. And I can tell you that experience still resonates with me to this day. And this was like some 40 years ago and everything in that space. And part of the reason it resonates with me is these were folks from Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia. I think the furthest down was Georgia. I knew none of these people. But I knew as soon as I stepped in that room that I had already met those folks. So it might have been through a dream. It might have been through some sort of communications. And I'm thinking that's probably what you do in some of your own work, Amazing Kreskin, is that you have these experiences where you are having a message. Some people may say it's a message from angels, a message from on high, whatever you want to call these dream interpretations, but they are so out there that you don't know how it's going to happen or anything along those lines. But I just know that to this day, and there have been other cases where that's happened, that I step into a room and I'm going like, I already know these folks, I already know what's happening. And one of the things that happens that is unique in that space, and some people will say that this is kind of hocus pocusy and everything, and I don't know what Amazing President is going to think about this, but sometimes, to what you were saying, Dr. Pitts, there can be moments where you feel a threat, and sometimes I believe that you can even maneuver the situation. So if I might be in a room and I might be like, I do not like that presence when I had that presence in the dream, and I might see a salt shaker or a cup, and I might slide that cup to kind of disrupt that energy flow that you were talking about. And usually it works to some degree.
Mark, can I mention just very quickly that just as a plug that I'm going to be appearing. It's a public show people can get to here in New Jersey on May 20th and the 27th in Atlantic City at Resorts. And I'm going to be doing the check test.
Wow.
That's May 20th and 27th at Resorts. But I like what you had to say, because you really pointed out that what we digest is not just our meals that affects our lives and so forth, but we digest human experiences and our thought patterns. And that has a pivotal effect on our future and the way we look at things.
It's like, who told you you were a victim? Who told you you weren't good enough? Who told you that you were insignificant? Who told you that you were unimportant? Who told you that you were stupid? Who told you that you were never going to amount to anything? And just because they told you doesn't mean, I say it this way, gentlemen, you don't have to take ownership of the bricks in somebody else's backpack of life. Just because they told you that doesn't mean that it has to become your truth.
Right.
I say it this way, and it's a little edgy, so please forgive me in advance, but this is what I tell folks. I tell them, you can choose to control your thoughts rather than have your thoughts control you.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a prostitute to the pimp of your situations, circumstances, and the people in your life. It is a choice, and people choose oftentimes. And I tell them, it's not to suggest the things that have happened to you have no meaning, because they do, right? But they don't have to define you. They don't have to validate you. Your past and all of those things that have happened to you do not have to define you, your present or your future, unless you decide that they must. And then the question becomes, if you decide that they're going to define you, why? Why are you making a conscious decision to surrender your power to people, places, and things that, truth be told, have no right whatsoever to treat you like a puppet?
But isn't that part of the problem? Isn't that part of the problem, Dr. Pitts? Is that, and I'd love to hear Amazing Kreskin's thoughts about this, is that too many people are afraid to deal with the realities of their own life and everything, and they oftentimes get into that concept of the inner critic and the outer critic, and the inner critic can be one of the worst ones, because we can sit there and defeat ourselves before we've even gone out there. And it sounds to me like you're in your 80s, Amazing Kreskin, but it sounds to me like when you were developing the gifts that you have, that you were encouraged by your folks and everything. But I know that there are some folks out there that are not encouraged, unfortunately, and they aren't, if they have a gift like you have, they are told to, suppress that gift or not to exploit that gift and things along those lines.
Mark, the other thing is that, and people in show business, people who know me well, say, Kreskin, how can you do this check test every night? They said, I couldn't stand the fear. I mean, you've lost a couple of $1,000 and when you failed and so forth. But my spirit and the way I think is such that I don't let a failure in the past stand in my way. I rise above it. By the way, for 50 years now, almost every single night, I jog from 20 minutes to 30 minutes. I run, whether it's in the winter, then I'll do it on a machine, or outdoors during the summer. And that's when I think. I don't wear an earphone. I refuse to listen to music, because I like to listen to my own thoughts.
That's powerful that you're listening to your own thoughts.
That is amazing.
And not only do you listen to your own thoughts, you're probably observing things around you that a lot of times people ignore. Because I know that I will go out for a walk and I will pay attention to the rabbits and the robins and the other things.
You want to do that. That's the thing to do. That's very wise.
Mr. Kreskin?
Yeah.
So what I didn't tell you is I'm a Jerseyan. I reside in Texas now, but so when you said
we're in Texas,
it's in my neck of the woods. I'm from southern New Jersey. I'm from a small town called Salem, part of the Underground Railroad, part of the Civil War and skirmishes.
What's the town called?
Salem, Salem.
Okay.
It's a port town in southern New Jersey, about an hour and a half west of Atlantic City. But when you said that, it triggered something in me, because I've resided in Florida for many, many years. And people didn't understand how I could drive from Florida. I lived in Tallahassee at one point, so it was 16 and a half hours door to door. And then I was living right outside of Daytona Beach, so about 14 hours door to door. And they didn't understand how I could take that drive in sheer silence. I wouldn't put on the radio. I wouldn't do anything other than be alone with the silence of my breathing, my thoughts. If I would crack a window, because I don't like air conditioning too much. If
you would drive alone sometime?
I would. A lot of times I would take that drive by myself. Sometimes my son would be with me, but a lot of times I would take that drive by myself, and people would say, oh my goodness, I'd be crazy. And I said, yeah, because you're afraid to be alone with you. You would be amazed at how much your self-awareness heightens when you spend time alone with you, just you and your thoughts, where you are being deliberate and intentional in controlling your thoughts rather than having your thoughts control you. And people are terrified of that. They always have to have this noise. They have to have the clamor of life, but that's by design to be a distraction to keep you from walking in the fullness of your gifts and your purpose. And people don't get it. They don't get it. And then they wonder why they have mental illness.
And mental illness does seem to be a
Because you
major.
won't do what you were given. It's your divine birthright to be of sound mind. But people get so distracted by all of these other things going on around them that it evolves into mental illness, relationship illness. People don't want to talk about emotional intelligence. They don't want to talk about relationship intelligence. They just want to talk about what happened to me. Dr. Pitts, you don't understand. Well, guess what? Dr. Pitts has a lengthy trauma history, but Dr. Pitts's trauma history does not define Dr. Pitts.
And Amazing Kreskin, one of the things I was curious about is, and you bring up a very valuable point, Dr. Pitts, is that too often it is a topic that is very much a needed topic to be talked about, but we don't deal with it until after the consequences are there. I think of a very famous comedian that passed away not that long ago, and I'm sure you probably did some work with him, but a lot of people, the signs were out there that Robin Williams was going through trouble, and he's only one example and everything. One of my favorites. But it didn't really come out until after the fact, until after he had committed suicide and all in that space. But I just wondered your thoughts about how much we're not dealing with mental health even in our own entertainment communities.
Yeah, we have to. We're not even helping that much, but we really, if you are aware, all of you listening in, and the doctor can verify this. If you're aware of someone, whether it's someone that's married into your family, or an older son or daughter, or that they seem to be becoming somewhat preoccupied, you must do yourself a favor. Get them to go with you somewhere, and just sit down and talk to them, or go for a walk with them, and just something that will maybe a different situation that will stimulate them and get them to talk about themselves, because you can find maybe a clue. They may suggest a clue that your interruption could divert them in some way. And this is if you see that, and by the way, during the shutdown for 2 years, when kids were not communicating as much anymore, they're not talking to each other as much. This was a very, very serious crisis, and as the doctor well knows, it can manifest itself into complications.
You know, it can definitely mind itself into complications, and you're so right about that and everything. Another topic, and I'm going to bring in a last guest. I know you.
And it doesn't take long.
But the other thing that I was curious about, and this is for you, Amazing Kreskin, and everything, is the other issue that goes on a lot is understanding your worth. And I know that can be an issue in the entertainment space, because there are a lot of folks that are, and definitely not an issue with you, but there are a lot of folks that are in the business that they know that it is called show business for a reason, but they're really good at the show part, but not necessarily the business part. And sometimes they don't necessarily go for their worth and everything. So I was just wondering whether you were getting a school gig, or like the gig you mentioned at Carnegie Hall. How did you get to the understanding of this being a business and not just a entertainment aspect? Because I think that a lot of times folks in all aspects of entertainment and all aspects of just life in general, because it's not just entertainers, even doctors and some accountants I know that are way undercharging. But how did you realize what your worth was, and how did you go for that worth?
Well, it's first of all, I believed from day one that this is my key to my life, and this was the crusade that I wish to travel on. I travel in my imagination. I viewed things. I could talk to you for the next 3 or 4 hours on incidents that have happened to me in my life, and they became colorful incidents. But at the same time, I also realized that I was sharing with people the possibility, and some will leave my program thinking, you know, maybe there is more to life than I realized. Maybe there is more to communication than I ever thought about. Because if I saw people on the stage responding so dramatically to what Kreskin did, because I demonstrate the power of suggestion, and I can, and my ability to instill suggestion without putting people into a trance has become written about in books. I can get a group of people on stage and in about 1.5 minutes, make it impossible for them to open their eyes. No, they're not in a trance. When it's all over with, as Carson would have told you, he says, I was no more in a trance than the man of the moon. And yet Carson, wide awake as he was, as I talked to him, he agreed to it. And 8 minutes later, fell over backwards as we lifted him and stretched him between two chairs with his feet on one, his shoulders on the other. And I ended up having Bette Midler, the performer, come over and sit on the middle of him. And he said it was like someone was putting a little paper bag there. That's how powerful the mind can be.
Wow. No, that's real deep, and that mind is that powerful and all that stuff. But the other thing that I think both of you kind of alluded to is I don't know. I was part of a group. It was actually a member of a gentleman that used to work for Lucas, but he created something called the Funky Eye Puppets. His name is IPC. You can see him on Clubhouse. You can see him in some places like around Instagram and all of that. But he created an audio theater group, and part of what he was doing was having this during the pandemic, understanding that a lot of us are not having a understanding that we still need to have that childlike wonder in our lives and all in that space. I don't think that enough of us are doing that. And I'm not saying you got to go and play games all the time or do all childish things all the time, but you do need to keep some of that childlike wonder, even when you're in your 80s or even when you're in your 50s or a number of other things. And I think that unfortunately we're not doing enough of that as society. But I was wanting to hear both of your thoughts about that, and I will bring in my other last guest and everything, who is a fellow musician and all of that. But I do want to bring in Clint as well and all in that space. But definitely, what is your thoughts about that, Dr. Pitts? And I'd love to hear from Mr. Kreskin as well.
The wonderment in my life has been a godsend because I look upon what I do with wonderment. I don't look surprised to my audience, but the excitement that I can create, and also the wonderment that I cherish is the wonderment I've created in the minds of people in my audience. When they leave, and I have students write me and told me they've read books about me and so forth, because they find it such an inspiring thing to see and to hear about. That we have, if we think we know it all, we know very little, very, very little about what's really going on in the world. And if I think to answer all my questions, I'd have to live 200 more years, because I just have endless questions about what's going on in life. And that's what inspires me. And the fact that people's thoughts, one of the greatest gifts we have, one of the greatest gifts is the gift of the imagination. Mm-hmm. When you look at some of the great writers, you wonder how they could become inspired. But children, thank God they use their imagination. And if they're not using it today, they've got to learn to use it. That's why fiction is important, but also storytelling is important. And story in one's life. I tell a story that's a picture in one of my books. A painter did a painting of it. I was looking for a check in one of my shows, and I was at the second level. In the second level, it was an old theater, and it had booths, like theaters years ago had booths you could sit in that jutted out from the a little bit over the side of this where the audience is, and you sat in these booths with maybe a family and what have you. And I was looking for my check, and I went to one of the booths and started reaching over, and I fell out of the booth. It was 1 story high. I felt the audience started screaming as I was tumbling out of the booth, because I felt my check was on the other side, which I should never have allowed anyone to do. And as I fell out, the man sitting at the booth with his family swung his hand across, caught my belt, and caught me swinging in the air, or I would have had a broken neck or a broken back. And that became a scene, even in a movie. Isn't that wild?
That's totally wild and everything. Clint, I'm glad you're able to join. I know one of the things that you talk about in some of your work as a comedian and also in the field of motocross is mental toughness. And part of what we're talking about is being mentally tough, even in these conversations. I know you've been backstage listening, but I just wondering some of your thoughts as we're having the pleasure of having this conversation with truly an amazing entertainer and an amazing gentleman, the amazing Kreskin. But definitely I'm just hearing so many powerful things that he is saying, but also that Dr. Pitts is saying. But if you want to share some of your insights as well.
Well, thank you for having me on. And I think that as far as at least these experiences that everybody's talking about is basically, I think, what builds your mental toughness. You know, it's being able to deal, you know, at first you go into any situation, no matter if it's a lot of sports, especially sports are good for teaching people this type of stuff, but you get into a situation where you think it's going to turn bad, or you're going to, like I used to wrestle, you know, like you're going to lose the match. And then if you can, you know, and it's the same thing dealing with stress all the time, be able to still stay calm and just focus on your breathing. And then that will allow you to actually, you know, push through a lot of things where in the beginning you start to panic. And until you kind of calm yourself down and are like, okay, let me just take some breaths and really think about it. You know, like you start to panic, and then you can calm yourself down, and then, you know, realize that you can handle more than you think initially.
Yeah, along those same lines, because I know that there's that old saying, it's an old cliche, and I'm going to bring it up that, you know, if you're in a public situation, you're supposed to imagine certain things that are going on, like maybe you're imagining folks that are like dressed scantily, if at all, in order to calm your nerves, because no matter how long you've been doing this, and I know that I've done MCing and radio work for decades, and definitely even I get nervous on those days that I am going in front of like a blues festival or a Festival, which is a kind of a earth type oriented festival in the folk space, because they're also a folk music festival. So there are definitely thousands of folks, and I am very nervous. But then once we get going and I'm doing the MC work, I have those nerves calmed, and then I try to remember two rules. One is if you make a mistake, don't bring attention to the mistake, because I think that too often folks make the mistake of bringing attention to the mistake, and then that becomes a whole part of the problem and all of that. And two, just kind of like calm those nerves, but acknowledge the fact that you have those nerves. So I guess my question for both you and for the amazing Kreskin is, do you still have those nervous moments even in your own performances? Because Esposito, you mentioned being a wrestler, and I know that you're a comedian and also in the motocross space, and amazing Kreskin, you performed all over the world, but I'm thinking that you probably still have those nervous moments now, even at the age of 80, in the 80s and all in that space.
I do, but I move on with it because I have a very strong will, and even when you doubt and you hear the tragedies that happen around you, you have to go on with life and contribute in what way you can. I've raised funds from numerous charities through the years, and fortunately, I've been very healthy. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to get away with what I'm doing.
Yeah, no doubt about
that. I obviously get nervous, and especially so I did freestyle motocross, which is doing the tricks and backflips and stuff like that.
Oh my God.
And I use the same technique for that when I would get nervous leading up to shows. You're being nervous because you're worried about what could happen. So I try to empower myself by using the present moment to do whatever I can do at the time, given what's around me or whatever, to prepare for that moment, whether it's even just visualizing, doing the tricks, visualizing stuff like that, or with comedy, going over my jokes, going over my set. So that way I have my set memorized. That way you don't really have time to be nervous. So if anytime you kind of get nervous about an approaching event, you just be like, okay, well, what can I do this second that's going to help me be more prepared in that moment? And then when you get to that moment, you feel confident because the whole time leading up, you've done everything that you could do so that you're as good as possible at that moment.
Hey, Clint, along those same lines, are you ever worried about the way that comedy could actually, amazing Kreskin alluded to this earlier with some of the rules that go on in the colleges and how you have to, in some places, send scripts ahead of time and everything. But do you ever worry that maybe we aren't as accepting of some of the jokes that we used to be accepting of because of the need to be, quote unquote, politically correct? Because I do know that there are folks that will try to tone down their jokes around certain communities, whether that's the LGBT community, the African American community, or a number of other communities. But I was just wondering, how much has that become a concern of you in your own comedy career?
Yeah, I look at it as you do. I don't do it across the board. But I think giving any given room, you kind of have to read the room. So it's going to dictate what kind of jokes you tell. And I wouldn't look at it as like, I guess if you're in an extreme scenario, like Brooklyn is hard for me because I don't tell those type of jokes, you know? So I think it's more so just I equate it to reading the room and being like, it's older people or it's younger people or it's this or it's that, you know. And so I still do my jokes, but yeah, I will cater a little bit to what I think the room's probably looking for.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and I can see that even from a mental health standpoint, because there are some people and certain topics that they don't want to address because of the fear of stepping on toes and all in that space. And
you may not even make people offended or anything, but like if I told jokes about like motorcycles or dirt bikes, for instance, most people cannot relate to that at all. And I've told jokes when I first started that were super simple that I thought everybody would get, and they just don't understand that, you know, genre one bit. So it's the same thing, you know, if the people, whether it be they're you know, like upset by it or just don't understand it, you've still read the room wrong. So I mean, especially with things like this, it is a lot. You have to deal with the people in the room, you know. So you basically, if I have a bad set, I look at it like what could I have done to relate to those people better? Like basically, did I use the wrong material? Did I not associate with it? Sometimes people like to be talked to, you know. I just look at any failure as like, where did I go wrong and how could I have made it better?
Yeah, that makes sense. I know one of the things that happened interestingly in the motocross world was that, and skateboarding world in general, was the need to get public spaces. I know here in Durham we've got a public space because a lot of the young folks were doing stunts in all kinds of crazy locations. So I think the city realized that they needed to be in a more controlled environment. I think that's part of the reason of the success of motocross derbies and even some of the skateboards, because there's a major one in one of our smaller towns. It might be either Fuquay Arena or one of the towns like that. But how much of the having a controlled environment has helped in the movement in the motocross industry or skateboarding in general? Because I know there was a time, and there's still a bunch of folks that are skateboarding and you're going like, I'm impressed by the trick, but I don't know that I want to see you doing that on a standard street or like one of those little slides or steps that are in
right public places where you could run into somebody else. Luckily enough, so dirt bikes, they don't really, there are you know, places that you can pay to go and ride, but there's nothing like in place like say with skateboards where it's a community skate park. But I mean, and other than the people doing wheelies in the streets, you know, which I'm not really that good at wheelies. I never really did that. The rest of us are kind of in the woods or in fields. So for the most part, I think motocross is kind of separated itself anyway. But I think with any of that, and it's probably even the same thing with just being skate parks, you now are connected to your community. So you're a skateboarder, you now know a bunch of other skateboarders in the area, and now you have like-minded people to go and skate with and progress with. So I think that's probably, you know, other than just the danger aspect and people being, you know, bothered by people skateboarding down the, you know, road or ruining their bench or whatever. I think having set places for people to gather and do these things just builds the community, and it helps everybody out. And I'm sure anybody here could tell you want to work with the best people in your genre that you have available to you so that you can elevate to their level. So, I mean, I think that's how those things kind of pan out.
No, and that actually plays to an important part. And I'd like to hear Dr. Pitt's thoughts around this, around the sense of community, because definitely whether it is skateboarders or whether it is motorcyclists, my brother actually belongs to the co-president. I don't remember whether he was president or co-president, but he's co-president of the Polaris Club. And the amazing Kreskin was mentioning comics books. I usually think of the Polaris slingshot as being like the Batmobile, because that's what it always reminds me of. When you see those 3 wheels and everything, they look like the Batmobile, but he's been the president of that particular sports club and all in that way. And then there are folks that are doing those motorcycles, and even those folks that are popping the wheelies, and sometimes they are honoring friends of theirs that were lost in stunts or lost in other things, meaning that they lost their life and all in that way. But I was just wondering, how much is it important to us to have a sense of community, and did we to some degree lose some of that even in some of the way that we got attached to the internet and to some of the other things that have not had us reach out as much to the local community? Like, how many of us here in this room, the 4 of us, actually can say that we know our neighbors? Because I know that I know a few of my neighbors, but I'd be lying if I said I knew all of them, and I don't know any on the backside of this particular apartment complex that I'm in. But how much is community vital to our life, and are we given enough due to that?
May I speak to that first?
Mark, I have to leave at 1:30 in a few minutes.
I do too.
And
then we get ready to wrap up everything. And I do have a quick question for everybody.
Forgive me for interrupting like that, but I have at the 1:30 hour, I have to go on to another communication. So
no, I appreciate it. And one of the things I definitely want to hear Dr. Pitt's answer. I know she's got to rush off as well. And we're getting ready to wrap the whole show up very shortly as well. But amazing Kreskin, if you can tell folks how they can reach you. And one of the things I get all my guests to do, because we are a global network, is to give a message of positivity and hope to our global community. So we have folks from around the world. You definitely mentioned some of the places that you have traveled and performed. So if you can give a message of positivity and hope to our global audience and ways that you can be reached. And I'm gonna have to talk to you about that YouTube channel of yours, because I might want to get that on by TV if that's allowed.
To access my website, they just go to amazingkreskin.com. I'm going to going on another broadcast I have to go to now. At the 1:30 within about 3 or 4 minutes. But you can get a hold of me by amazingkreskin.com, and let's keep in touch. Be the good Lord willing. I hope I see all of you again. It's been a pleasure working with you.
I hope so too. I hope that you will come back on in the near future.
I promise when I come back. When I come back, I'll be sober. I don't drink, but I kid all the time. Take care now. I got to go, folks.
I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I appreciate having the amazing Kreskin on and all in that space. But what is your thoughts about the need for community and all along those lines, Dr. Pitts?
So community is everything. One of the things that I share with my clients when I'm doing their consultation is that I'm going to look at their life across domains. I do my work looking systemically, holistically, strength-based, and solution-focused. And the holistic piece of this clinical work that I do and the life coaching work that I do is understanding that our life is categorized into domains. So your overall health and well-being, your love and relationships, your academic and career trajectory, how you spend your time and with whom you spend your time, and even your financial situation at times is all informing how you think, feel, function, and navigate life. So when you remove the sense of community, i.e., for example, when you look at what everybody went through from a mental health perspective with the pandemic, it erodes you. It erodes your sense of self. It erodes the quality of life. And it has this huge ability to adversely impact how you function. I don't know what happened to him.
I don't know either.
It has this huge ability to impact how you think, feel, function, and navigate life. So community is definitely an integral part of how we navigate this thing called life, and whether we're doing that in the healthiest possible way. Should we keep going?
Well, it seems like it's still streaming.
Okay. So the other thing, there were a couple of other things that were mentioned that I wanted to touch on when he talked about children and wonderment. And I think that a big part of why children aren't perhaps as connected to their imagination as they used to be is because I think that the design of the school system is different than it used to be. Now teachers are teaching to the test, right? It's No Child Left Behind from the second Bush administration. And there's all of this pressure to be academically sound. And I really believe that children aren't permitted to be children anymore. And then when you factor in the impact that social media has had on the way children function. They've been robbed of their innocence and their purity from so many different angles that children are growing up much faster today than they ever have been in the history of the world. And that can rob you. Matter of fact, you know, what do teachers say to little kids when they're daydreaming in class? Johnny, pay attention. What does mom say when you're talking to little Sarah? You pay attention to me. Are you listening to me when you're talking? And they're sort of squashing the child's ability to connect with their imagination and to embrace the innocence and purity that comes with them being able to just be authentically who they are as little children that play, dress up, and do all of these things. And then the other question that I didn't have an opportunity to chime in on is the nervousness piece. And I think, you know, Clint, you said it beautifully, right? You have to know your audience. You absolutely, positively have to. I see myself as, and in the very, very, very beginning part of my career, I was a chef for years. But I see myself as someone providing food. The audience is hungry, right? Whatever it is that I'm, whether I'm doing a training or I'm doing a motivational or inspirational segment, I'm a keynote or whatever it is, whatever the reason is that I take stage, I have the food. They're hungry. My job is to feed them and to make sure that everybody gets fed. So I approach public speaking similarly to how I approached it when I was teaching. I use a differentiated instruction. I work the room, so to speak. And I think you alluded to that, right? I work the room and I try to meet people where they are so that the message that I'm delivering is connecting to everybody in a way that resonates with them.
Well, with you, especially, you're trying to, everybody has different issues that they're dealing with that you're trying to get to the heart of. So you couldn't say the same thing to everybody anyway. It wouldn't, it's a different, every room and every client's a different, you know, scenario.
I'm forced to wear multiple hats all day, every day. And I have, because of, I have my clinical clientele and I have my life coaching clientele. So I literally have a global clientele. So cultural nuances and gender variances, it's so many different things that I have to take into consideration in working with my client base that I can't use a cookie cutter approach in any aspect of my work. I have to be diversified in how I'm delivering the services in order to be effective. And that's what I tell my clients. It's like, we have to learn how to work in tandem so that we can get you from point A to point Z. And we have to be a team. Otherwise, you're not going to get what you came here to get. And I'm not going to be effective in my efforts to help you to be a better version of yourself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and everything as you can tell, having those lovely computer things that happens even on podcasts and all in that space. So I had to switch from one device to the other and all in that way. But what are some of the things, Clint, that you have found to be similar between being in the motocross field and the comedy field? Because that's when I was going like, these seem to be two diverse fields. One might be a little bit more left brain, the other a little bit more right brain. But what have you found to be the common factor?
I mean, I guess it's because I enjoy, the performance aspect of it, like basically it's, this is your time, go, which I kind of like the preparing for that moment. I also like being, performing, which I didn't really think that I did because I just liked riding, but now I'm doing it without any bike or anything. So it's like, oh, I do kind of like to perform. And because I enjoy both the same, you know, like the nervousness ahead of time is different because people ask me and I'm like, I'm nervous to go on stage. I was at times scared to ride because of the scenario was like not, you know, ideal. But afterwards is the most similar. Like when you have a good set or you have a good day riding on your way home, you have that same positive feeling and you're just excited and you won't shut up. You just keep talking.
Now that makes a lot of sense. Now I'm assuming the wrestling that you did, because you also mentioned wrestling was what some people would consider performance wrestling. So how much of that?
No, that was just like in middle school or whatever I wrestled. But I know that when I was thinking about the mental toughness thing earlier, I know that a lot of it came from sports and scenarios like that because regular, freestyle wrestling, you do definitely get into scenarios where you're like, oh no, I'm in trouble, and you start to panic. And basically that's where kind of I learned to, take some breaths. You've got a couple seconds at least, and then try to just adjust and then, go back at your problem.
No doubt about that. Like I was saying, we're getting ready to wind down very shortly as I switch back to the other main computer. But I know, Dr. Pitts, you said you had to leave first before Clint does leave and everything. So if you had any messages of positivity and hope that you want to give, and how folks can reach you, and if you want to share some more about your work in general, I'm sure that folks that are listening would love to hear that. And I do hope that you, along with the amazing Kreskin and Clint, will make a return trip, because we do have regular shows here. And of course, I have enjoyed our conversation today, and I hope you all have enjoyed it as well.
Absolutely. So, my word of wisdom to the audience is similarly to what I said earlier on in the show. Your past doesn't have to define your present and your future unless you decide that it should. Those are the things that have happened to you. They are not the things that define you. And I think, Clint, that you said it beautifully, right? It's the things that have happened to us that are instrumental in helping us to build mental toughness. But what I've found in this work is, more times than not, it's when I'm working with my clients around building resilience, right? People are victims, right? They allow the situations and circumstances of life to rob them of their power, to erode their sense of self. And what I tell them is, you get to choose. You get to choose how you view your experiences. It's cliche, it's old as all outdoors, but we've all heard the expression, it's not what happens to you that determines your success or failure in life, it's your response to it. And as cliche as that is, it's true though. You don't have to be a victim of your circumstances unless you decide that you just want to be. And it's all about your choices. And my client, they get irritated with me. I honest to goodness, I've had clients fire me because I won't co-sign their dysfunction or their dis-ease. And that's okay, because I only want to work with people who absolutely positively want to get well, who want to be healthy, and who want to have the best possible life experiences that they can. But here's the thing, and Clint, you alluded to it, right? Life is ebbs and flows. It's peaks and valleys.
Mm-hmm.
We are stronger and better because of the valleys of life. We are stronger and better because of the adversities. How can you ever possibly know how strong you really are if you never go through anything? You have to be able to navigate the curveballs of life, is what I say, in order to be the best version of yourself that you can possibly be. Wake up every day, folks. Every single solitary day with it purposed in your heart, mind, spirit, and soul to be a better version of yourself than you were yesterday. Stop allowing yourself to blow like the wind with all of the adversity that comes your way. This in no way is making light of your pain. Your pain is real to you. We are not dismissing that. We are not saying that bad things have not happened to you. We are not saying that you're not hurting. But you don't have to stay a victim to those things, because guess what? We all go through them. Some of us go through them in greater degrees than others. But at the end of the day, if you've never gone through anything, keep living. You will. Yeah. You're either going through something, coming out of something, or about to go through something. And those somethings do not have to deplete you. They do not have to diminish you. They do not have to defeat you unless you decide that they should. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. We live in a global society that would have us to believe that asking for help is a sign of weakness. I say not asking for help is a sign of weakness. So that's my long-winded encouragement to the audience. As far as
I appreciate that. And I know, and definitely wanted to know how they can get in touch with you. But how do we get people out of that victim mentality? Because I know I've even been guilty of that victim mentality where you are afraid that things are going against you for whatever reason. I know I definitely have friends that are harping on that victim mentality. So how do we encourage people out of that victim mentality and also get out of it ourselves? Because I would be lying if I said that I don't have my moments of feeling that I have been victimized by this.
Yeah. Super glue to the pity pot. You got Gorilla Glue. So here's the thing, folks. You have to be willing to be held accountable. I tell my clients from day one, the only people that I coddle as children were people going through grief and loss. And then I don't coddle them very, very long. But this is what I say to folks. You need to be willing to have an accountability partner. You need to be able to have someone in your life that can add value to you and not co-sign your pity, right? You need to be able to connect with someone that is going to be instrumental in helping you to shake your tree of life, to snap yourself out of it and say, this is what happened to me. It doesn't define me. I don't have to be a victim. I just don't. So as far as how people can get in touch with me, I'm pretty much everywhere. So I am, I'm on the Speakers Bureau for RAIN, which is the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, because I am a huge advocate against sexual assault and domestic violence. So I can be contacted through my website, which is drlaurendpitts.com. You can just go on there and, send a message and I'll respond. You can email me directly at lauren@drlaurendpitts.com. I'm literally out there. I have a podcast on Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. It's called House Talk Pregame with Dr. Lauren Pitts and Ronnie Ransom Jr. That is addressing sports and mental health. So you can, sign up and register to be a member of the virtual studio audience, or you can just tune in. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We are on YouTube. We're on Facebook Live. We're on Zoom. I literally am everywhere. I tell folks, if you Google my name, I'm everywhere. I'm absolutely positively going to come up and reach out. I'm available to train and speak and however folks choose to reach out to me, I am accessible and very much available and willing to add value to those who want to add
Well, we're
value.
gonna have to have you. Yeah, we're gonna have to have you come back because you just mentioned two things that I know are very much passionate to the network and what the network is about. Because Kimberly Calhoun, another one of the founders, along with Nick Palveda, is very much involved in that domestic violence space and has done some work in even having some patents around that space and has done some work with some of the local or North Carolina police forces, particularly one down there in High Point and some other places. And that is an issue that we're even seeing counselors that are going with the police to address some of the things around domestic violence. So we know that is a very vital. Yeah, we definitely need to have that. Yeah, because the police aren't trained in those kinds of fields, and we also need to have stronger conversations around mental health and our athletes. So we're definitely going to have to have you come back because that is an issue that is not talked about enough in my mind, the mental health aspects of what is going on with our athletes.
No, it's not. Gentlemen, thank you so much for having me. Clint, it has been my sheer pleasure sharing the platform with you today. Mark, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to coming back. I've got clients waiting. You all have a wonderful week.
Go take care of those clients. You definitely got to do that, and I appreciate you and everything. So definitely appreciate that. Clint, get ready to wind down. I think we've got another 10 to 15 minutes, but if you want to share some of your thoughts on what you've been involved in, like I said, we talked about that mental toughness aspect and some of the other things that you have been doing. And of course, we alluded to some of that during the conversations we've been having. But if you want to share some of the things that you've got going on that we didn't get to, I'm sure our audience would love to hear your story as well, because we're all about sharing stories and all in that space.
Well, going on, I have a comedy show actually Thursday coming up that I'm producing here in Hackettstown, New Jersey. And over the summer, I'll be doing some motorcycle firewalls and stuff. My friend does car stunt shows.
What is a motorcycle firewall?
So they put up build like a little firewall, and then they light it during the show, and I ride the bike through it. It's a full. Okay. It's called the Black Cat Hell Drivers. It's a like an old school thrill, like car thrill show. They used to have them in the from the 40s to probably like the 80s or 90s. They had them mostly, and they've kind of slowed down. So I'm work with one of my friends that still has a car stunt show, and mainly comedy, and I do some stunts for TVs and movies. A little bit. I'm getting into it.
Okay. That been what kind of stunts, and was there any movies that we would have heard of that you've done these stunts for, and how has that work been? Because I know that it seems like it's very exciting and it seems like it's very controlled, but we do know that sometimes those controls don't always work, as we saw in that gun incident there in Arizona and everything. But I'm just wondering, where are you doing the stunt work, and how is that going as a various careers? Because it sounds like you are a true Renaissance man, a man of many jobs, even though they're all in the entertainment space.
Yeah, I'm trying not to have a quote unquote real job is the issue. So I'm just getting more into the stunt stuff. The show that I did last was Blue Bloods. So I don't know that I don't even know what TV station that's on. But yeah, I was in I guess it was season 13. The bike gang took over the intersection right next to the police station. I was one of the bikes wheeling across the street, and I'm not even really sure what we're supposed to be. I'm supposed to have one next week. I'm just waiting on the stunt coordinator, but I don't even know what that's for. Nobody told me.
And I actually remember that episode of Blue Bloods because that's one of the shows I watch, because I think it's either on Icon or Fubo or one of those other networks. It's on your cable channel that's got a lot of the older shows that are airing now and all in that space. And I know that one of them has Blue Blood and has NCIS and Bones and a number of those others. So I think I remember that episode that you're talking about, because I do remember catching up on that show after the fact, because some of these shows were done years back and now they're showing them again, and then some of them are newer shows. Like I think that the new MacGyver might be a newer show, but there are definitely some of the older classics. So I know exactly what you're talking about. As we're winding down and everything, how much do you think is important for entertainers and creatives to have that quote unquote side job or that side hustle? Because I do know that I have quite a few friends that are trying to do like you are, trying to make it in their entertainment field, but then they're also having to work for the secretarial job or a job in testing, or maybe a job with some of the COVID activities. And of course, we know quite a few performers that are driving DoorDash and Uber and Lyft and all of that kind of space, whether they be in the New York, New Jersey area, North Carolina, where I'm at, or California, or a number of other places. So how much has that been almost a necessity for those that want to get into entertainment to do, is to have those side hustles?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're trying to do anything, right? Like if you're just say you're trying to basically make podcasting your job, because I do have some podcasts too. It's like any of these things, you need to take it serious enough, like it's actual job, and start putting the work in. And a lot of that means that you're going to have to back off on your regular job, your full-time job. So I think having a part-time job or a side hustle is very important, because you need to start carving out time to dedicate to what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
No, I definitely agree with that and everything. Trying to get rid of the other image and get back to my full camera and all in that space. And there's actually the amazing Kreskin stuff, but we'll get back as we wind down and all along those lines. But yeah, I've just seen so many folks that have been struggling and trying to figure out how they were going to get that job and get that entertainment job. And like I was alluding to with the amazing Kreskin, I know a lot of folks are sitting there going like, wait a minute, can I make a living off of this job and all in that space? Or is it going to have to be nothing but a hobby and that kind of way? But I'm just wondering your thoughts about that, and whether we have to, can you make a true living as a creative, or do you have to have that other job, as some people will try to tell us, those that are trying to discourage the creatives of the world?
I think the transition is when you need the side hustle. But I think that once you get yourself into a position where you're actually starting to generate doing the thing that you're doing or that you want to do, I think that's when you then just go all in and do it as much as you can, but I think, I mean, you're still trying to do it as much as you can, but my point is, and this is anything, whether you want to be creative or an athlete or anything, there's going to be a time when you're transitioning where there's a lean period where you're not making the money because you have to take time away from a full-time job to be able to apply it to whatever it is. So I think, yeah, you need to find something to help, sustain money-wise, that's hopefully flexible enough that it allows you to do, what you're trying to focus on. So, I mean, I work a mechanic job 2 days a week, but that's, it's flexible enough where if I have like next week when we do the stunts, I'll be like, hey, I can't come in next week. And I have that set up purposefully so that way I can still generate money. But if I have something come up in the space that I want to actually, be in eventually, then I have the flexibility to go and do that. So, I mean, listen, everybody from day one, when I was a kid, everybody told me I'd never make money riding dirt bikes.
Right.
And I wanted to race, and then eventually I saw the opportunity for freestyle. I started doing freestyle. I started my own team. I built my own portable ramps, which basically everybody was still like, that's crazy. What are you doing? So I think that putting too much value in what people around you say or think, especially if they can't see your vision, if they don't understand, like a lot of the people around me didn't ride dirt bikes for a living, right? So they're like, you can't do that, but they just don't know. So, I mean, you just can't listen to all those people. Most people are going to tell you can't do something, whether they know it or not. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's because they didn't accomplish whatever they wanted to. And at some level, they're just trying to, like they don't want you to accomplish things because then it proves to them that they probably could have done it.
And in that same space, do you think that sometimes we get too caught up in trying to live other people's visions? Because that's another problem that I've seen happen too often, is that we get too caught up in the other person's vision, even in the entertainment space, and aren't necessarily trying to follow our own vision. I'm not saying you can't be supportive of other people and their visions, but I have seen too often cases where people are too caught up in the dream of the other person. And you can have multiple dreamers and even multiple dreams, but I wish more people would be supportive of each of their friends' dreams as well as their own dreams. But I do think that sometimes they are so caught up in their own dreams that they can get you to almost kind of usurp your dreams. But I was just wondering your thoughts around that, and if that was something you've run across.
Well, I think it's more so that they don't understand where you're trying to go. Like if they don't see your vision of what the end goal is, or they're interpreting it different from how you've explained it or what they think it should be. So they're not seeing where you want to end up. So maybe what they're thinking that you're, what I mean? They're interpreting what you're doing as different, or they don't think what you're doing or want to do will work. And it's like, will whatever your idea need some tweaking? Sure. Are you going to fine tune stuff? Sure. But that doesn't mean that your whole idea is no good. It's just like, this is with anything, right? If you start anything, you just go, I want to do whatever podcast. And then what do you get into? Having to have equipment for podcasts, and then having to schedule the podcast. And it becomes a bunch of other things that you don't understand. So I think somebody that's not in the space that you're in, no matter what it is, they're not going to understand, your vision and the things you need to do to get there.
Yeah. And like we were saying earlier, the other part that gets in the way is people understanding their worth. And I'm sure you ran across that as well. So I was wondering if that's a conversation that you had to deal with, because we know that this is definitely show business. And I don't know that we are always giving the worth that we are due in that space. So I was wondering whether it's a comedy club, because I do know that sometimes comedy clubs, like music clubs, can be notorious for undercharging or giving us that old cliche, you're going to do it for the exposure. And sometimes you've had 20 or 30 years of exposure, you're past that exposure conversation and all of that space. But I was just wondering your thoughts around that, and at what point do you give them a little bit of leeway, or is there like the cutoff point where you're like basically like, you're going to pay your plumber, you need to pay me, whether it's for doing a comedy show, or it's doing a stunt work, or the various other things that you are doing in the entertainment space?
So I think that and I've dealt with a lot of artists, and I guess I'm an artist, but like painters and stuff like that, people that draw or paint, and then nobody really knows who they are, and then they're like, my painting's worth this, and it's like, is anybody gonna pay that for it? No. Well, then guess what? It's not worth that, unfortunately. So I think that you do have a beginning. In the beginning, you're not worth very much, right? Because you're just learning the craft and nobody knows you. So I think that sometimes, a lot of times, people get caught up in what I'm worth too early. And I think some of that comes from it's something they're trying to make the money from whatever it is, not doing the thing because they love it and they want to do it. And I think there's a difference if you're just like, I'm going to do this no matter what, and say you were a painter, nobody wants to buy your paintings. You have to do something to get your name out, and if that is selling paintings really cheap for a while or whatever, then that's what it is. In comedy, yes, I think you get to it in the beginning. You're just trying to get on stage and you're just trying to get time. And unfortunately, clubs know that. So they do exploit that a little bit. And I know even in freestyle motocross, that was exploited as well, because it's young kids, young dudes that just want to ride for a living. And they're like, I don't need that much money. I'll do it for this, which eventually they realize once you get hurt, you do need that much money. You probably needed more money so that way you could pay for things when you were hurt. But it is definitely, and that's a fight, right, between worth and ego.
Right.
Because I've always said, even when I rode dirt bikes for a living, I was always amazed at the money that I was making doing what I was doing. And I used to say then, I was like, once you feel like you're worth what they're paying you, it's over. Like, I still feel when I get money from comedy and stuff, or even riding, I'm like, this is awesome. Like, so you definitely need to get to the point where you are making money from it. But I think that there's a gray area of, you do need to put in the work kind of unrecognized for a little bit to get yourself in the position where now you are worth something, a given dollar amount or whatever that is. And a lot of times you can set it yourself. Once you get into the point where you're starting to get bookings and stuff, then you can kind of dictate your own price to an extent in both comedy and freestyle motocross. You just, or anything, but you just realize that you do run the risk of pricing yourself out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What is your thoughts? And then, like I said, we're going to wind down very shortly in all of that space. But what is your thoughts about the state of comedy? Because, we definitely have seen some days where comedy was at its heyday. Actually, a good friend of mine is the producer of This Christmas, Ronnie Warner, and all in that space. So I do know that definitely there was a time that he was managing a comedy club. I want to say this was in the 90s, maybe the early 2000s. And that club was quite successful here in North Carolina before he eventually went off to California and had that successful movie, and also did Puff Puff Pass and some other works that he's had recently, and all in that space. But we would sometimes talk to comedians, and that was in the heyday of comedy. But I don't know that comedy is still having that same heyday that it used to. But I was just wondering, what is your thoughts about the status of the comedy market in the United States and around the world?
I think I don't think it's in the heyday, I wouldn't say, but I do think it's kind of making a resurgence, because it's funny. You do have the people that want to be offended by everything, or that are offended by everything, but you still have a lot of people that go out and want to laugh at stuff that's a little bit, you know what I mean, off color or whatever, so I don't know. I there's lots of comedy everywhere. So I think there's so many comedians.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it is still growing. I think the whole thing with being worried about woke people and canceled and all that is a little bit blown out of proportion. You know, too many people, I feel like when people get canceled, their real issue is like apologizing and trying to go make a statement and, you know, feeding into that. Like Chappelle, basically, they tried to cancel Chappelle and he was just like, didn't pay attention to anything. And he was like, this is getting canceled. This is awesome. I've gotten, you know, the most press I've gotten in years. So I don't know. I think I don't really.
It's interesting you say that because we were talking about that on the media show earlier today because there was a whole argument as to whether Dylan Mulvaney needed to be getting all of the negative publicity that she's gotten in because of that Budweiser community commercial and representing the trans community and everything. And as one of the fellow panelists said on that particular show, she's not exactly hurting for followers when she got the contract, and if anything, they've actually boosted her followers, and she's gotten some other deals, including Nike and some other things. So, if anything, it was probably that good publicity that is actually helping the careers that they thought that they were harming by bringing up the fact that she was part of a ad campaign.
Yeah, exactly. That's, you know, to an extent, and I will say there are obviously things that happen that are like reprehensible, that's not going to help your brand. But as long as you don't cross like super hard on these lines, I think that you're going to survive. I mean, and I think it's another thing that like we talked about with the mental toughness earlier. As soon as people see any type of pushback online, they freak out, you know, and then even the managers of these people and stuff like that then drop clients because of a little bit of pushback. And it's like you said, they're probably still going to have a bigger awareness after this. And we know with everything, you know, the LGBT Bud Light can to MAGA hats, whatever. We know there are people on either side. No matter what you think, there are probably people that agree with you. So I think we're just blowing stuff out of proportion of, you know, being so offended and, you know, trying to cancel people. You know, no, I don't think it makes that much sense.
No, I don't think it makes much sense at all in that space. Do you think that we're ever going to go to the space of all the performances being live and in person? I know that one of the places I'm working, I'll actually be going there later because they'll be having a dance class over there. They have every Monday. That there is definitely a lot of in-person things that are trying to come back, but there is also some of those that are being done in conjunction with the live streaming and hybrid events and that kind of way. But I don't know that whether it's offices or whether it's performances that we're ever going to be fully in just one dimension. And then if you add augmented reality and the metaverse, we might even be in 3 or 4 dimensions. So do you think that that is going to be the wave of the future, that it won't be just people going to the show, but they'll also be seeing the show maybe in a live stream, maybe in the metaverse, maybe in a number of other environments as well?
Yeah, exactly. And because even during the, I had some things change. I'm not doing it currently, but during the pandemic, I now own livestreamcomedy.com. And we were doing just that. I had shows where it was in-person audience because we had to limit the amount of people in the audience. So I would do an in-person audience and then I would charge a couple dollars for the stream. But the way I did the show was it was a bunch of sketches and live stand-up comedy. So this way it was kind of a format that worked whether you were at home or in the room. So in the room I produced it all from the desk and then had a TV. So then the people in the room we would introduce clips or sketches, and then we would play it on the TV, and then that would go full screen online. So I'm working on bringing that back, but I think that that's the way that this stuff is going to go. I mean, and even there's, I didn't know about him until just recently. My friend that does the car stunts, there's a YouTuber, Cletus McFarlane or something, and he's got like whatever 3-4 million followers on there. Then he bought an old speedway and he calls it the Freedom Factory. He had a big event there, bus racing. My friend jumped cars, stuff like that. And then they also sold the stream online. So I think that the people that have the, the foresight to see that and the money to